History, as they say, is written by the victors. But what happens when a victory is simply impossible? In the 19th century, the British Empire was busy crushing kingdoms all across the globe. Boer commandos were forging new republics in blood and iron, and they all sent army after army to destroy one African king. Every single one of them failed, because this king didn't just have an army, he had a fortress in the sky. This is the story of King Moshoeshoe and how he used a single mountain to build a nation that could not be conquered. But before we begin, this channel is all about calm, thoughtful storytelling from Africa's rich history. If you're someone who enjoys listening to history while on a long drive, winding down before sleep, or just taking a quiet moment to yourself, you might find these stories the perfect companion. So if that sounds like you, consider subscribing and joining us for more journeys into the past. Okay, now back to the story. The story of the Mountain King doesn't start on a throne. It starts with fire, chaos, and a world being torn apart. In the early 1800s, southern Africa was convulsed by a period of apocalyptic violence known as the Mfecane, or in the Sotho language, the Difakane. Both names mean the same thing, the crushing. This wasn't just one war. It was a domino effect of destruction. It started in the east, where drought and population pressures created a powder keg. Out of that inferno rose the Zulu kingdom under the ruthless military genius, Shaka. Shaka didn't just reform warfare, he perfected it. He created a disciplined, professional army armed with the deadly short stabbing spear, the Ikalwa. His regiments, the Impis, were a human tide that washed over the region, and entire societies simply shattered before them. The Mfecane was a chain reaction of terror. Kingdoms defeated by the Zulu weren't just beaten, they were obliterated, their people scattered to the winds. These fleeing, starving refugees then crashed into other groups, fighting desperately for land, for cattle, for survival. As social order collapsed, grim reports of cannibalism emerged from the shadows of the mountains. The land was filled with intruders, and the weak were consumed by the strong. It was a time of burning villages and constant fear that completely reshaped the map of southern Africa. This was the world a young man named Lepoko was born into. He was just the son of a minor chief, one of 100 other young warriors. But Lepoko had something more valuable than weapons, a mind that saw patterns in chaos. He didn't just see the end of the old world, he saw the chance to build a new one. As a young man, he was known for his skill in cattle raids, the traditional way a warrior made his name. After one successful raid, he composed a praise poem about himself, declaring that like a sharp razor, he had shaved the beards of his enemies. From that day on, he was no longer Lepoko. He was Moshoeshoe, the shaver. The name stuck. But while other chiefs saw only the next raid, Moshoeshoe saw the bigger picture. He knew the old ways of petty rivalries were a death sentence in this new age. Survival required unity, and unity required a safe place to build. His first attempt at a stronghold, a place called Buta Bute, was vulnerable. He knew it was a temporary fix, especially with a rival clan led by the fierce chieftainess Mantatisi, proving to be a persistent threat. To build a real nation, he needed more than a hill. He needed a fortress forged by nature. He sent scouts to search the rugged landscape, and they returned with news of a mountain unlike any other. A flat-topped plateau rising from the valley floor, ringed by sheer cliffs. A natural citadel in the sky. In July of 1824, Moshoeshoe led his people on a desperate trek to their new sanctuary. The journey was perilous, shadowed by cannibals who preyed on stragglers. they finally reached the base of the great mountain and ascended in the dead of night. As the sun rose, they looked out upon their new home. Moshoeshoe, ever the master of psychology, named it Thaba Bosiu, the Mountain of the Night. The name was a stroke of genius. He let a legend spread that the mountain actually grew taller after dark, possessing a magical power that would confound any nighttime attacker. It was brilliant psychological warfare, turning geography into a supernatural deterrent. But the real power of Thaba Bosiu was its physical defense. The mountain stood over 350 feet high, with a vast, flat summit covering nearly 2 square kilometers, enough space for thousands of people, their homes, and their precious livestock. Surrounding it all was a formidable barrier of cliffs, averaging 40 feet in height. There was no easy way up. The mountain was accessible by only a handful of steep, narrow passes that were natural kill zones. Attackers had to ascend single file, completely exposed, while defenders rained down spears and boulders from above. A small group of warriors could hold off an entire army. Critically, the summit also held the key to surviving a long siege. 8 natural springs provided a permanent, protected water source. Moshoeshoe hadn't just found a refuge, he'd found an anchor for his nation. From this eagle's nest, he began the audacious task of building a new kind of kingdom, one based not on conquest, but on protection. He immediately put his vision into practice. He sent out his regiments not to conquer, but to gather. They sought out the shattered remnants of clans, the starving refugees wandering the plains. To these desperate people, Moshoeshoe made an unheard-of offer. Not subjugation, but sanctuary. He gave them grain from his stores, cattle to restart their herds, and a place behind the unbreachable walls of Thaba Bosiu. This policy was revolutionary. In an era of brutal, zero-sum conflict, Moshoeshoe offered peace. He treated defeated enemies with generosity, turning former foes into loyal subjects. He even managed the complex process of rehabilitating and reintegrating desperate bands of cannibals back into society. He understood that national strength came from unity, not purity. He forged alliances through marriage and generosity, welcoming people of Sotho, Nguni, and San heritage. His capital became a magnet for the displaced, a multi-ethnic sanctuary where a new shared identity began to form: the Sotho people. His nation was built on the idea, Kotso Enala, peace is prosperity. But Moshoeshoe was no pacifist. He was a pragmatist who knew peace had to be defended, and soon his fortress would be tested. First, the Ngwane attacked and were repulsed. Then, in 1831, a far greater threat appeared, the mighty Ndebele, led by one of Shaka's most brilliant commanders, Mzilikazi. The Ndebele warriors swarmed towards Thaba Bosiu, but the mountain held. The narrow passes choked their advance, and the Basotho defenders drove them back. In a move that would become legend, Moshoeshoe saw the retreating, hungry Ndebele and sent them a gift of his finest cattle with a message, "Peace be with you. Here is food for your journey." Mzilikazi was so impressed, he never attacked the Basotho again. Moshoeshoe had survived the crushing, but a new threat was coming, this time on horseback and in wagons. With the Mumfakane receding, Moshoeshoe focused on nation-building. From the safety of Thaba Bosiu, his people could plant crops and raise herds in peace. His power wasn't absolute. He governed through a council of chiefs and a public assembly called the Pitso, where any man could speak his mind. This inclusive style strengthened the loyalty of his diverse subjects. He was also a master of innovation. After being gifted a horse and a pistol, Moshoeshoe immediately grasped their revolutionary potential. He began a concerted effort to acquire firearms and horses from traders, turning his warriors into expert horsemen. The Sotho quickly developed into a highly mobile, mounted force perfectly suited to the rugged terrain, a critical edge for the wars to come. Then, in 1833, another new group arrived, 3 missionaries from the Paris Evangelical Missionary Society. Moshoeshoe didn't just see men of God, he saw a vital window to the wider world. They were literate. They understood the Europeans. And they could be a direct line of communication to the biggest power in the region, the British at the Cape Colony. He welcomed them, and they became his trusted advisors and diplomatic secretaries. It was a move of pure genius. But as one threat faded, another emerged. Starting in the mid-1830s, thousands of Boer families, the Voortrekkers, left the British Cape Colony to establish their own republics in the interior. They rolled across the plains in their ox wagons, and the fertile Caledon River Valley, the heartland of Moshoeshoe's kingdom, was exactly what they wanted. At first, things were cautious but peaceful. Moshoeshoe granted some early arrivals permission to use land for grazing, assuming they recognized his authority as chief. The Voortrekkers, however, came from a world of private land ownership and written deeds. They saw temporary grazing rights as permanent land purchases. This fundamental cultural misunderstanding, communal use versus private ownership, was the seed of a brutal conflict. The Boers weren't like his previous rivals. They didn't want to raid cattle and leave. They wanted the land itself, forever. As their numbers grew, they pushed deeper into Sotho territory, claiming vast tracts of the best land. Tensions exploded into clashes and raids. The fight for the Caledon Valley had begun. The conflict with the Boers of the newly formed Orange Free State would become a fight for survival. The Free State Sotho Wars raged from 1858 to 1868. The first major war erupted in 1858. The Boer commandos were effective on the open plains, but their attacks shattered against the Sotho mountain strongholds, especially the impenetrable Thaba Bosiu. Meanwhile, the Sotho, now skilled horsemen and marksmen, waged a brilliant guerrilla campaign, harrying Boer supply lines before melting back into the mountains. The exhausted Boers were forced to make peace. Round 1 to Moshoeshoe. An uneasy peace held for a few years, but the land question was never resolved. Under a new, determined president, Johannes Brand, the Orange Free State prepared for a second, more decisive war. This conflict, beginning in 1865, was known in Sotho as the Sekiti War. The name was onomatopoeic. Sekiti was meant to mimic the thudding sound of the Boers' new weapon, artillery. They believed cannons would succeed where riflemen had failed. The Sekiti War was far more brutal. The Boers adopted a scorched earth policy, burning crops and seizing cattle to starve the Sotho into submission. They overran much of the lowlands, but the ultimate prize remained Thaba Bosiu. In August 1865, the Boers laid siege to the Mountain of the Night. Their cannons bombarded the summit. After days of this, a respected Boer commandant named Lou Wepener led a storming party up one of the steep passes, but the mountain held firm. The pass became a deadly bottleneck. From the cliffs above, Sotho warriors unleashed a devastating hail of bullets, spears, and rocks. The assault was a bloody failure. Wepener and many of his men were killed. The Boers had thrown their best at the fortress, and the fortress had broken them. Yet, despite the heroic defense, the war was taking a terrible toll. The scorched earth strategy was working. Famine stalked the land. Weakened and pressured, Moshoeshoe was forced to sign the punishing Treaty of Thaba Bosiu in 1866, ceding a huge portion of his most fertile land. It was a devastating blow. To the Boers, it was a triumph. They believed they had finally broken the Mountain King. They were wrong. The Boers were a persistent threat, but looming over everything was the colossal power of the British Empire. Moshoeshoe's relationship with the British was a masterclass in diplomacy, a complex dance of alliance and resistance. In 1843, he signed a treaty with the Cape Governor, which recognized him as a British ally. Moshoeshoe hoped this would give him a powerful friend to check the Boers, but the British were fickle allies. In 1848, they annexed the entire region, creating the Orange River sovereignty. Suddenly, Moshoeshoe's kingdom was under direct British jurisdiction. A British official, Major Henry Warden, drew a map, the Warden Line, that stripped the Sotho of vast amounts of land. Moshoeshoe's diplomatic protests were ignored. The British underestimated him, and in June 1851, Warden marched a force of British regulars, Boer commandos, and African allies to teach the Sotho a lesson. The result was the Battle of Berea, a disaster for the British. Moshoeshoe's forces used their superior knowledge of the terrain to inflict a humiliating defeat on Warden's column. London was furious. They sent a new commander, Sir George Cathcart, with a massive force to crush Moshoeshoe once and for all. In December 1852, Cathcart issued an impossible ultimatum: 10,000 cattle and 1,000 horses within 3 days. It was a clear pretext for war. On December 20th, Cathcart's army of over 2,500 regulars crossed the Caledon River. He made a classic blunder. He split his forces into 3 columns. This allowed the Sotho's mounted warriors to isolate and attack each column separately. The Battle of Berea raged below Thaba Bosiu. One British column of lancers was lured into a trap and overwhelmed, losing 27 men. By the end of the day, Cathcart's grand invasion had turned into a desperate struggle. His army was scattered, his casualties were mounting, and his men were demoralized. That night, as the humiliated general contemplated his next move, a messenger arrived with a letter from Moshoeshoe. It is now one of the most famous documents in South African history. Instead of boasting, Moshoeshoe wrote as if he were the one who had been defeated. He praised the Queen, acknowledged that he had been chastised, and begged the general to be content and leave in peace. It was a masterstroke. It gave Cathcart an exit. He could claim a victory and withdraw his battered army without further loss of face. He accepted immediately. The British army retreated, leaving Moshoeshoe's kingdom intact. He had faced down the redcoats of the world's greatest empire and won. Moshoeshoe's military victories were legendary, but they were always just one tool in his strategic arsenal. He was playing 3-dimensional chess while his opponents were still learning the rules. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a statesman who knew survival depended on outthinking his powerful neighbors. His French missionary advisors were his foreign ministry. They translated his letters and helped him craft a careful image for the outside world. That of a reasonable, peace-loving monarch besieged by aggressive neighbors. He expertly played the Boers and the British against each other. When the Boers were the main threat, he appealed to the British for protection. When the British got too aggressive, he resisted fiercely, then immediately extended an olive branch. His letters reveal a brilliant mind, combining deferential language that appealed to European sensibilities with firm, logical arguments that laid bare the injustices done to his people. This diplomatic skill reached its peak during the darkest days of the Sekiti War. The Boers were on the verge of total victory. His kingdom was shrinking, his people were starving, and his military options were gone. It was at this moment of near-total defeat that Moshoeshoe played his final, desperate gambit. He realized only a political solution could save his nation. For years, he had been petitioning the British High Commissioner, Sir Philip Wodehouse, for protection. He argued that if the British didn't intervene, the Orange Free State would annihilate his people. He also subtly pointed out that if the Boers controlled his territory, they would gain access to the sea, something the British were determined to prevent. He appealed directly to Queen Victoria herself, offering to become her subject in exchange for protection. It was a calculated sacrifice. He would give up his independence to save his people from annihilation. He was choosing the lesser of two evils. On March 12, 1868, as Boer commandos massed for what they believed would be the final assault on Thaba Bosiu, a proclamation was issued by Sir Philip Wodehouse. By order of Queen Victoria, the Sotho nation was now under the protection of the British Crown. Basutoland was officially a British protectorate. Moshoeshoe's prayer was answered. The war was over. The Boer commandos, furious at being robbed of their victory, were forced to halt. While a later treaty confirmed the loss of much of the Sotho's fertile land, it guaranteed the existence of their kingdom. The mountain heartland, with Thaba Bosiu at its center, was saved. Moshoeshoe had achieved the impossible. He had outlasted Shaka's impish, outsmarted Boer commandos, and outmaneuvered British generals. He died in March 1870, just 2 years after seeing his kingdom saved. By his request, he was buried on the summit of Thaba Bosiu, the fortress that had been the cradle and shield of his people. His legacy is immeasurable. The nation he founded, Basutoland, remained a British protectorate for nearly a century, shielding it from being absorbed into South Africa and its brutal apartheid system. In 1966, Basutoland gained full independence as the Kingdom of Lesotho. Today, Lesotho exists as an independent kingdom in the sky, completely surrounded by South Africa, a reality that is the direct result of Moshoeshoe's leadership. His story is a timeless lesson in how wisdom can triumph over brute force. He faced two of the 19th century's most formidable expansionist powers and fought them to a standstill, not just with warriors and walls, but with ideas. He used a single mountain as the anvil upon which he forged a nation, a fortress in the sky that became a symbol of unconquerable will. His kingdom stands today, a living monument to the invincible mountain king who could not be conquered. If you've enjoyed this journey into Africa's past, consider subscribing for more stories told in this calm, thoughtful way. Each week we uncover another piece of history that shaped this continent, and I'd love to share those moments with you. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.